Welcome, dear friends, to Mystic Bedtime Stories. I'm your gentle companion for tonight's journey into the mists of time. Here, in this quiet sanctuary we've created together, we step away from the rush of modern life and let our minds wander to distant lands and forgotten wisdom. Tonight, as you settle into the comfort of your pillows and let the weight of the day slowly lift from your shoulders, I invite you to close your eyes and breathe deeply. Feel yourself sinking into that perfect space between waking and sleeping, where stories become dreams and dreams become doorways to other worlds. Our channel is dedicated to those peaceful moments just before sleep, when your mind is ready to release its hold on today's concerns and drift toward tomorrow's possibilities. Each story we share is crafted with care, designed to carry you gently into rest while feeding your soul with the rich tapestry of human history and imagination. For those who are new to our community, welcome home. For our returning listeners, it's wonderful to have you back in this circle of storytellers and dreamers. Whether you're lying in bed after a long day, sitting in your favorite chair as evening settles around you, or finding a few moments of peace wherever you may be, you belong here. Tonight, we embark on a particularly special journey. We're traveling back through the veils of history to a time when the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was as thin as morning mist. We're going to explore the land of the Celts, those mysterious people who lived not as conquerors of nature, but as its children. Picture, if you will, the rolling hills of ancient Europe, covered in forests so vast and deep that sunlight filtered through their canopies like cathedral light through stained glass. These were not merely trees to the Celts, but living temples, each grove a sacred space where Druids whispered prayers that seemed to make the very leaves shimmer with understanding. The Celts left behind no great stone cities like the Romans, no pyramids like the Egyptians, no vast palaces like the Persians. Instead, they left something perhaps more precious and certainly more enduring. They left the whisper of wind through oak branches, the memory of songs sung around fires that burned bright against the darkness, and stories that have traveled through generations like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever they landed. As we begin our journey together tonight, let yourself imagine that you're walking along an ancient path, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. The air is cool and clean, carrying the scent of moss and earth and something indefinable. That speaks to a part of your soul that remembers what it was like when humans lived as part of the natural world rather than separate from it. You might hear, just at the edge of your awareness, the distant sound of a wooden flute playing a melody so achingly beautiful that it seems to have always existed, as eternal as the stars themselves. Perhaps there's the gentle lowing of cattle in a far meadow, or the soft splash of a stream making its way over stones polished smooth by centuries of patient water. This is the world of the Celts, a world where magic wasn't something separate from daily life, but woven through it like gold thread through fine cloth, where Druids served not just as priests, but as doctors, judges, teachers, and keepers of all the stories that held their people's identity together like strong roots hold a mighty oak. Tonight, we'll walk with these ancient people through their sacred groves. We'll sit by their fires and listen to their wisdom. We'll learn about their beliefs, their art, their music, and their way of seeing the world as one great, interconnected web of life where every tree, every stone, every creature had its own spirit and its own story to tell. But perhaps most importantly, we'll discover how the Celtic way of understanding the world can offer us something precious in our modern lives. In an age of constant noise and hurry, the Celts remind us of the value of quiet contemplation, of listening deeply to the world around us, and of recognizing that we are not masters of nature, but participants in its endless dance. So settle in, dear friends. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel your muscles relax, starting from the top of your head and moving down through your body like warm honey. Allow any remaining tension from your day to simply melt away, knowing that this time belongs to you and to the gentle unfolding of this ancient story. We have all night ahead of us, and there's nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Simply listen and let the whispers of the Celts carry you toward peaceful sleep and perhaps toward dreams of oak groves and starlit ceremonies, of wisdom keepers and eternal cycles, of a time when humans knew they were part of something magnificent and mysterious and endlessly beautiful. Our story begins now in the mists of prehistory, where legend and history dance together like lovers. In the moonlight, and where the voices of the ancestors still echo through the trees for those who know how to listen. If you were to ask a Celtic warrior from ancient Gaul to draw you a map of his homeland, he might look at you with puzzlement. Borders, as we understand them today, were foreign concepts to these remarkable people. The Celts were not a nation, in any sense we might recognize, but rather something far more beautiful and complex, a living tapestry of shared culture, language, and spirit that stretched across the face of Europe like starlight across the night sky. Let your mind drift back with me now to a time around 500 BCE when the world was younger and wilder. Picture Europe not as the patchwork of countries we know today, but as an endless expanse of forest and hill, river and plain, where the only boundaries that truly mattered were those created by the natural world itself. From the emerald shores of Ireland in the west to the mysterious forests of what we now call Romania in the east, from the misty highlands of Scotland down to the sun-warmed hills of northern Spain, Celtic peoples made their homes wherever the land called to them. They were like seeds scattered by a generous wind, taking root and flourishing in countless valleys and beside numberless streams. But what made someone Celtic was not where they lived, but how they lived. It was in the cadence of their speech, which flowed like water over stones, musical and alive with meaning that went deeper than mere words. Celtic languages shared a common ancestry, branching out like the limbs of a great tree, each group developing its own dialect while maintaining connection to the greater whole. In what is now France, the Gauls spoke their version of this ancient tongue while tending their fields and crafting their beautiful metalwork. Across the Channel, the Britons used similar words to sing their children to sleep and call their cattle home at evening. In the green hills of Ireland, yet another branch of the Celtic language, family was used to weave the stories that would survive long after the stones of Roman cities had crumbled to dust. These were not primitive people, as some later conquerors would claim. The Celts were skilled farmers who understood the rhythms of the seasons as intimately as their own heartbeats. They grew wheat and barley, tended herds of cattle that were both wealth and sustenance, and knew which wild plants could heal and which could harm. Their knowledge of agriculture was so sophisticated that they could coax abundant harvests from lands that others might consider marginal. As metalworkers, they had few equals in the ancient world. Celtic smiths could forge iron into tools and weapons of remarkable quality, and their work with gold and bronze created jewelry and decorative objects that still take our breath away when archaeologists uncover them from their long sleep in the earth. These artisans didn't simply make objects. They imbued them with meaning, covering everything from sword hilts to mirror backs with intricate patterns that told stories and invoked protection. But perhaps most remarkably, the Celts were united by something that can't be held in the hand or measured in any earthly way. They shared a way of seeing the world that recognized the sacred in everything around them. To a Celt, there was no separation between the physical and spiritual realms. The two existed together, interpenetrating each other like warp and weft in a beautifully woven cloth. This worldview shaped everything about Celtic society. Their kings were not just political leaders, but spiritual figures who were expected. to maintain the harmony between their people and the land itself. A good king would bring prosperity and good harvests. A bad king would cause the very earth to rebel, bringing famine and discord. Their artists didn't simply create beautiful objects, but served as conduits for divine inspiration, channeling the patterns they saw in nature and in their dreams into works that could transport viewers to other realms of consciousness. A Celtic jeweler working on a golden torque wasn't just fashioning an ornament, but creating a sacred object that would connect its wearer to the ancient powers of the earth and sky. The Celts lived in settlements that ranged from single-family farms to substantial hilltop fortresses, but all were designed with the understanding that humans were part of the natural world, not separate from it. Their homes were built using local materials, timber from the surrounding forests, stone from nearby quarries, thatch from the grasses of their fields. When a Celtic settlement was abandoned, it would fade back into the landscape so completely that within a few generations, the forest might reclaim it entirely, leaving only the faintest traces for future archaeologists to puzzle over. Trade was important to the Celts, and their merchants traveled vast distances, carrying not just goods, but ideas, stories, and innovations from one Celtic settlement to another. A bronze mirror made by craftsmen in southern England might find its way to a Celtic princess in Central Europe, while amber from the Baltic shores would be worked into jewelry worn by nobles in Ireland. This network of trade and cultural exchange meant that while Celtic peoples might be separated by hundreds of miles, they remained connected by shared traditions, similar art styles, and common beliefs. A Druid trained in the sacred groves of Wales could travel to Gaul and be welcomed as a brother by the Druids there. A Celtic warrior from one tribe could marry into another tribe far from his birthplace, and find that while the local customs might vary in detail, the underlying patterns of life were comfortably familiar. Yet this lack of rigid political boundaries, which was such a source of strength and cultural richness for the Celts, would eventually become a source of vulnerability when they encountered peoples who thought very differently about power and territory. The Romans, with their systematic approach to conquest and administration, would find it difficult to understand or appreciate the fluid, organic nature of Celtic society. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For now, simply let yourself imagine this remarkable civilization in its prime. Hundreds of thousands of people spread across the face of Europe, united not by conquest or coercion, but by shared stories, similar languages, and a common understanding that the world was alive with mystery and meaning. As you settle deeper into sleep tonight, carry with you the image of these borderless people, whose true homeland was not any particular piece of ground, but a way of being in the world that honored both the practical and the magical, both the needs of daily life and the yearnings of the eternal soul. Close your eyes now and imagine walking with me down a path that existed long before humans ever thought to pave roads or build cities. This is an ancient track, worn smooth by countless generations of Celtic feet, winding its way through a forest, so vast and deep that it seems to breathe with its own ancient life. The trees around us are not the small, managed woodlands we might know today, but towering giants that have stood here since time immemorial. These are the great European forests of antiquity, stretching unbroken for hundreds of miles in every direction. Oak trees so massive that 10 people holding hands could not encircle. Their trunks reach up toward a canopy so thick that the forest floor exists in a perpetual twilight, dappled with patches of golden sunlight that shift and dance like living things dot to the Celtic peoples. These forests were not wilderness to be conquered or resources to be harvested, but the living heart of their world. Every grove was a cathedral, every ancient tree a pillar supporting the very dome of heaven. The Celts understood something that we in our modern world have largely forgotten, that humans are not separate from nature, but part of its endless, sacred web. Listen carefully, and you might hear what the Celts heard in these ancient woods. There's the soft whisper of wind through leaves that sounds remarkably like voices, speaking in a language just beyond the edge of understanding. The gentle creaking of great branches overhead creates a rhythm like the slow breathing of some vast, benevolent being. Somewhere in the distance, a stream chatters over stones, its voice joining the forest's symphony. The Celtic home was built within this living temple, not imposed upon it. Their settlements were clearings, carved out with great care and ceremony, always leaving the most sacred trees untouched. A Celtic village might grow up around particularly magnificent oak, or beside a spring that was believed to have healing properties. The boundaries between the human world and the natural world were not barriers, but permeable membranes, allowing the sacred energy of the forest to flow freely through their daily lives. Their homes themselves were constructed to honor this relationship. Round houses built of local timber and stone seemed to grow from the earth rather than being placed upon it. The circular shape was not accidental, but deeply meaningful, representing the eternal cycles of life, death, and rebirth that govern both human existence and the natural world. The hearth at the center of each home was more than a place to cook food or ward off the winter cold. It was a sacred flame that connected the family to the cosmic fire that burned at the heart of creation. The roofs were thatched with reeds and grasses that had been gathered with prayers and thanksgiving, acknowledging that even these simple materials were gifts from the living earth. When rain fell on these roofs, it was welcomed not as an inconvenience, but as a blessing from the sky spirits, and the sound of water dripping from the eaves was considered music that helped attune the inhabitants to the rhythms of the natural world. Outside each home, gardens were planted not in rigid rows, but in patterns that imitated the wild profusion of the forest itself. Herbs for healing grew beside vegetables for sustenance, and both were interplanted with flowers chosen, not just for their beauty, but for their ability to attract beneficial spirits and ward off harmful influences. To tend such a garden was to participate in the ongoing creation of the world, to be a partner with the earth in the ancient dance of growth and harvest. The Celts recognized that the forest was populated by more than just trees and animals. Every oak grove had its resident spirits, ancient beings who had watched over the land since the first seeds took root. Springs and streams were guarded by water spirits, who could bring blessing or curse, depending on how they were approached. Even individual trees, particularly the great oaks that lived for centuries, were believed to house the souls of ancestors, or to serve as dwelling places for gods and goddesses. To walk through a Celtic forest was to walk through a living library, where every tree held stories, every stream sang songs that contained the wisdom of ages. Children learned to read this natural script as carefully as they would later learn the spoken histories of their people. They could identify which plants would ease a fever and which would bring prophetic dreams, which stones held power, and which springs were safe to drink from. The seasonal changes in the forest marked the great festivals of Celtic life. When the first tender leaves appeared on the oak trees, it was time for Bedtime, the celebration of spring's return, and the fertility that would bring new life to both crops and herds. When the leaves turned gold and began to fall, it signaled the approach of Samhain, the sacred time when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the ancestors grew thin. Even death, in the Celtic understanding, was not separate from the forest's wisdom. When a Celtic person died, their body was often returned to the earth in sacred groves, where it would nourish the trees that had sheltered their life. This was not seen as an ending, but as a transformation, a way of ensuring that the person's essence would continue to be part of the eternal cycle of life that flowed through the forest like an underground river. The Druids, those wise keepers of Celtic tradition, made their schools and temples not in buildings of stone and mortar, but in groves of living trees. Students would come to learn under the spreading branches of oaks that had been teachers to countless generations before them. The curriculum included not just the memorization of laws and genealogies, but the deep study of natural rhythms, the language of birds, the healing properties of plants, and the subtle ways that humans could live in harmony with all the other. Beings who shared the forest at night, when darkness settled over the forest like a soft black cloak, Celtic families would gather around their hearth fires and tell the stories that connected them to this sacred landscape. Tales of heroes who received wisdom from talking trees, of goddesses who appeared at forest springs, of druids who could call rain or sunshine simply by understanding the deep patterns that governed the relationship between earth and sky. As you drift toward sleep now, let yourself imagine that you are lying not in your own bed, but on a soft carpet of moss beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak. Feel the solid presence of the great tree above you, its roots reaching deep into the earth, its branches stretching toward the stars. Know that you are held and protected by the same living energy that sustained the Celtic peoples for countless generations. The forest is still there, even beneath our modern cities and highways. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, just before sleep, we can still hear its ancient whispers calling us home. In the heart of the sacred grove, where the oldest oak trees stretch their ancient arms toward the starlit sky, a figure moves silently between the shadows. Dressed in robes the color of moonlight, this is a Druid, one of the most mysterious and revered figures in all of Celtic society. But let go of any images you might have from popular stories or movies. The real Druids were far more complex and fascinating than any fiction could capture. Imagine, if you will, that you are sitting by a small fire in a forest clearing on a night when the moon is dark and the stars shine with particular brilliance. The air is cool and sweet with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and somewhere in the distance, an owl calls softly to its mate. Here, in this sacred space, a Druid is about to share wisdom that has been passed down through countless generations, never written on parchment or stone, but held in the living memory of those chosen to be guardians of their people's deepest truths. The Druid before you is neither young nor old, in any way you could measure. Time seems to move differently for these wise ones, as if they exist partially outside the normal flow of years and seasons. Their eyes hold depths that speak of lifetimes spent in contemplation of mysteries that most people never even imagine exist. When they speak, their voice is gentle, but carries the authority of someone who has looked into the very heart of creation and understood something of its infinite complexity. To become a Druid was not a career choice made lightly or quickly. The training could take 20 years or more, during which the student would memorize vast quantities of information that encompassed not just religious practices but law, history, astronomy, medicine, poetry, and the intricate genealogies that traced every family's connection to the gods and heroes of old. All of this knowledge was preserved entirely in memory, for the Druids believed that writing sacred wisdom on dead materials like parchment or stone would rob it of its living power. Think of the incredible mental discipline this required. A fully trained Druid could recite the complete history of their people, going back generations beyond counting. They knew the names and deeds of every important ancestor, the precise words of every law and legal proceeding, the exact movements of the stars and planets for years into the future, and the properties and uses of every plant that grew in their territory. But beyond this vast store of factual knowledge, they also held something even more precious, the deep understanding of how all these seemingly separate pieces of information were connected in one great web of meaning. The Druids served their communities in roles that we would today divide among many different professions. They were judges who could settle disputes with wisdom that took into account not just the immediate circumstances, but the long-term effects of their decisions on the harmony of the community. They were doctors who understood that true healing addressed not just the body, but the mind and spirit as well. A druid treating a patient might prescribe herbs and dietary changes, but they would also examine the person's relationships, their spiritual practices, and their connection to the natural world. They were astronomers who could predict eclipses and calculate the best times for planting and harvesting. But their knowledge of the heavens went far beyond practical agriculture. To the Druids, the movements of the stars and planets were part of a cosmic language that revealed the will of the gods and the destiny of nations. They could read in the night sky the approach of good harvests or lean years, times of peace or periods of conflict. Perhaps most importantly, the Druids were the keepers of their people's connection to the sacred. They conducted the rituals that marked the turning of the seasons and the great transitions of life. When a child was born, it was often a Druid who welcomed the new soul to the world and spoke the blessings that would guide and protect throughout that person's life. When someone died, the Druids helped the soul find its way to the other world and comforted the grieving with their deep understanding of death as transformation rather than ending. The Druids moved freely between the different Celtic tribes, for their sacred knowledge transcended political boundaries. A Druid trained in Ireland could travel to Gaul or Britain and be welcomed and honored wherever they went. This network of wise ones helped maintain the cultural unity that kept the far-flung Celtic peoples connected despite the vast distances that separated them. In times of conflict, Druids often served as ambassadors and mediators, for even the fiercest warriors recognized their authority and respected their wisdom. There are accounts of battles being postponed when a Druid stepped between opposing armies and declared that the time was not right for bloodshed. According to the movements of the stars and the will of the gods, the Druids understood magic not as something separate from the natural world, but as a deep knowledge of the hidden connections that linked all things together. They knew which words spoken at which times could influence the weather, which rituals could heal not just individuals but entire communities, and which ceremonies could ensure the fertility of crops and herds. But this was not the flashy magic of fantasy stories. It was subtle, patient work that required profound understanding of natural rhythms and spiritual laws. Women could become Druids just as men could, and some of the most powerful and respected Druids were women whose wisdom was sought by kings and queens. These Druidesses often specialized in prophecy and healing, and their advice could influence the fate of entire nations. They understood the mysteries of birth and transformation in ways that complemented the knowledge of their male counterparts. The training of a Druid took place not in buildings, but in sacred groves, beside holy springs, and on hilltops where the connection between earth and sky was particularly strong. Students learned to read the language of nature itself, the meaning of different bird calls, the significance of unusual cloud formations, the messages that could be found in the patterns of falling leaves or the way water flowed around stones. In a stream. As the Roman Empire expanded and began to encounter Celtic lands, the Druids became figures of particular fascination and concern to Roman writers. Some, like Julius Caesar, wrote detailed accounts of Druidical practices, though how accurate these accounts were is a matter of debate among modern scholars. The Romans, with their more systematic approach to religion and education, found it difficult to understand a tradition that was so fluid, so deeply rooted in oral rather than written culture. Yet, for all their power and wisdom, the Druids were also humble servants of something greater than themselves. They understood that they were not the source of their knowledge, but merely vessels through which ancient wisdom flowed from the gods and ancestors to the people who needed it. They lived simply, often owning little beyond their robes and the tools of their trade, a staff cut from sacred wood, a knife for gathering herbs, perhaps a bronze mirror for scrying, or a collection of stones with special properties. As you settle deeper into the peaceful embrace of approaching sleep, imagine that you are sitting in that sacred grove, watching as the Druid tends the eternal fire that burns at the heart of their tradition. The flames dance and flicker, casting moving shadows on the surrounding trees. And in those shadows you might glimpse the faces of all the Druids who have come before, their wisdom flowing like an underground river through the centuries, carrying the deepest truths of what it means to be human in a world alive with mystery and meaning. The Druids may be gone from our world, but their understanding that wisdom comes not from books alone, but from deep listening to the living world around. US remains as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you now to a hilltop where ancient stones stand in a perfect circle, worn smooth by countless centuries of wind and rain. The moon hangs full and luminous overhead, casting silver light on the faces of Celtic people who have gathered here for one of their most sacred ceremonies. This is no grand cathedral built by human hands, but rather a temple created by the earth itself, where every element of the natural world participates in the worship of the divine God. Feel the soft grass beneath your feet as you join this ancient gathering, watching as the Druids move with practiced grace between the standing stones. Each stone has been placed with infinite care, not just in the physical realm, but in the spiritual one as well. These are markers between worlds, doorways through which the gods and spirits can step into the realm of mortals, and through which mortals can glimpse the infinite mysteries that lie beyond ordinary perception. The Celtic understanding of the divine was as vast and complex as the natural world itself. Unlike religions that focused on a single distant deity, the Celts recognized that the sacred manifested through countless forms and faces. Every spring had its water spirit, every grove its resident god or goddess, every mountain its own particular deity who governed the storms and watched over the people in the valleys below. At the heart of their pantheon stood figures of immense power and beauty. There was the Dagda, the good god, whose magic cauldron could feed any number of people, and whose great club could kill 9 men with one blow, yet restore life with its handle. Brigid, the triple goddess of poetry, smithcraft, and healing, whose sacred fires were tended by priestesses and never allowed to die. Law, the shining one, master of all arts and skills, whose festival marked the beginning of the harvest season when the first fruits of the earth were offered in gratitude. But these great gods were not remote figures dwelling in some distant heaven. They walked among mortals, fell in love with human heroes and heroines, and participated directly in the affairs of their worshippers. A Celtic farmer might leave a portion of his best grain at a crossroads as an offering to the local land spirits, knowing that these gifts would be received by beings who understood his struggles and would respond with practical help in the form of good weather and fertile soil. The sacred calendar of the Celts was marked by 8 great festivals that followed this eternal rhythm of the seasons. At Samhain, when the veil between the worlds grew thin, families would light bonfires to guide the spirits of their ancestors home for a visit, setting places at their tables for beloved dead and leaving doors open so that ghostly feet could find their way inside. This was not a time of fear, but of joyful reunion. When death was revealed to be merely another room in the great house of existence, Imbolc celebrated the first stirring of life in the depths of winter, when the ewes began to give milk and the earliest flowers pushed through the snow. Beltane welcomed the full flowering of spring, when young people would dance around maypoles and couples would leap together over bonfires to ensure their fertility and bind their love with the blessing of the earth spirits. Lugnasad marked the beginning of the harvest, when the first loaves of bread made from new grain were offered to the gods with prayers of thanksgiving. Each festival was a time when the entire community came together, not just to mark the passage of time, but to participate consciously in the great cycles that governed all life. The rituals themselves were works of art, as much as religious observances. Imagine the careful preparation that went into each ceremony, the gathering of sacred plants at precisely the right phases of the moon, the crafting of special breads and ales using recipes that had been passed down through generations. The weaving of garlands from flowers chosen for their symbolic meaning as well as their beauty. When the time came for the ritual to begin, every participant understood their role in a drama that was both ancient and eternally new. The Druids would call upon the gods and spirits of the place, speaking words in the old tongue that seemed to make the very air shimmer with power. Offerings of the finest foods and most precious objects would be made, not from duty, but from genuine love and gratitude for the abundance that surrounded them. Music was an essential part of Celtic worship, but this was not music as mere entertainment. The songs and melodies used in religious ceremonies were believed to have the power to open doorways between worlds, to call down blessings from the heavens, and to harmonize the human community with the greater symphony of creation. The Celtic harp, with its haunting, ethereal voice, could evoke emotions so deep that listeners felt their souls being touched by something far greater than themselves. Sacred pools and springs were perhaps the most intimate of Celtic worship sites. Here, individuals could come alone to make personal offerings and seek guidance for their private concerns. Archaeological excavations of these ancient, holy wells have revealed treasure troves of votive offerings, beautifully crafted jewelry, coins, weapons, and personal items thrown into the dark water as gifts to the spirits who dwelt below. The act of making such offerings was deeply personal, yet connected the individual to the entire web of Celtic spirituality. A young woman might throw her silver bracelet into a sacred spring while praying for a safe childbirth. A warrior might dedicate his finest spear to the water spirits before going into battle, trusting that his generosity would be remembered and rewarded with protection and victory. Trees, especially the mighty oaks, served as natural cathedrals where some of the most important rituals took place. The Druids believed that certain trees were so ancient and wise that they served as direct conduits to the other world. Ceremonies conducted beneath their branches had special power, and the mistletoe that grew on these sacred oaks was harvested with golden sickles and used in the most potent healing and magical rituals. The Celtic approach to death and the afterlife was woven throughout their religious practices with a matter-of-fact acceptance that would seem remarkable to many modern minds. Death was not an ending, but a journey to another realm. It was just as real and vital as the world of the living. The other world was not a distant paradise, but a parallel reality that existed alongside the physical world, separated by barriers that were permeable to those who knew how to cross them. Warriors who died in battle were believed to continue there. Fights in the other world, while poets and musicians would join the eternal celebration that filled the halls of the gods with music and storytelling. Ordinary people would reunite with their ancestors and continue to live lives that were similar to their earthly existence, but free from suffering, want, and death. This understanding of death as transformation rather than termination colored every aspect of Celtic religious practice. Funeral rites were elaborate celebrations of the person's life and journey, with feasting, music, and storytelling that could last for days. The deceased would be buried or cremated with their most precious possessions, not because they needed these objects in the afterlife, but as expressions of love and respect for the journey they were undertaking. The Celts practiced divination as a regular part of their religious life, consulting the gods and spirits about everything from the best time to plant crops to the outcome of important battles. Druids trained in the arts of prophecy would read omens in the flight patterns of birds, the shapes of clouds, the entrails of sacrificed animals, and the patterns formed by casting lots or throwing sacred objects into water. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Celtic religion was its recognition that the divine was not something separate from daily life, but woven through every moment and every activity. A Celtic mother nursing her baby was participating in the sacred mystery of nurturing life. A blacksmith forging iron was working with the same creative fire that the gods used to shape the world. a farmer planting seeds was collaborating with. The earth spirits in the eternal miracle of growth and renewal dot as sleep begins to claim you now. Let yourself feel the ancient peace that comes from knowing you are part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than yourself. In the Celtic understanding, you are not alone in the universe, but surrounded always by a vast community of spirits, ancestors, and gods who know your name and care about your journey through this world and into whatever lies beyond. In the heart of the ancient Celtic world, where mist clung to sacred groves and moonlight painted silver pathways through the forest, there existed a truth that set these remarkable people apart from all others. To the Celts, death was not an ending, but a doorway. It was not a final farewell, but merely a turning of the great wheel that governed all existence. Imagine, if you will, standing in a moonlit clearing where Druids once gathered. The air is thick with the scent of burning sage and the whispered prayers of generations. Here, in this sacred space, the veil between worlds grew thin, and accomplished, ancient Celts understood something that modern minds often struggle to grasp. Life was eternal, cycling endlessly like the seasons themselves. The Celtic understanding of existence was beautifully complex, woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. They saw life as a great spiral, not a straight line with a beginning and end. Just as the oak tree shed its leaves in autumn, only to burst forth with new growth in spring, so too did the human soul journey through cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. This profound belief shaped every aspect of Celtic society. Warriors rode into battle without the paralyzing fear that gripped other peoples, for they knew that death in this world meant birth in another. Mothers grieved their lost children. Yes, but with the deep comfort of knowing they would meet again in the other world, that mystical realm that existed parallel to our own. The Druids taught that the soul was like a traveler on an endless journey, gathering wisdom and experience through multiple lifetimes. Each death was simply the soul shedding its earthly garment, preparing for its next adventure. This wasn't merely wishful thinking or comforting fantasy. It was as real to the Celts as the ground beneath their feet and the stars above their heads. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the forest held its breath and even the wind seemed to pause in reverence, the Druids would speak of the other world. This realm existed not in some distant heaven, but here, all around us, separated only by the thinnest of veils. On certain nights, particularly during the sacred festival of Samhain, this veil grew gossamer thin, allowing communication between the living and those who had passed beyond. Samhain, which we now know as Halloween, was perhaps the most important celebration in the Celtic calendar. But it was far more than a festival. It was a sacred time when the boundaries between worlds dissolved. On the night of October 31st, when autumn's grip tightened and the year began its descent into the dark half, the Celts believed that spirits of the ancestors returned to walk among the living. Picture the scene in an ancient Celtic village. As Samhain approaches, families carefully tend sacred fires that have burned continuously since the previous year. These fires are not merely for warmth or light. They are beacons calling the ancestral spirits home. The Druids, draped in their white robes, move through the settlement with slow, measured steps, their faces painted with sacred symbols that mark them as guides between the worlds. As darkness falls on Samhain night, the villagers gather in the sacred grove. The great bonfire crackles and dances, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. This is not a celebration of death, but of the eternal cycle of existence. Children listen with wide eyes as their elders tell stories of ancestors who have crossed over but remain present in spirit. Grandmothers speak of husbands who visit in dreams, offering guidance and comfort. Grandfathers tell of warriors who fell in battle but continue to protect their families from the other world. The Celts created beautiful burial practices that reflected their beliefs about death and rebirth. They did not see the grave as a prison for the body, but as a doorway to transformation. Warriors were buried with their finest weapons, not because they would need them to fight in death, but because these items represented their journey and growth in life. Women were laid to rest with their most precious jewelry and tools, symbols of the wisdom and skills they would carry into their next existence. In some Celtic regions, bodies were placed in stone chambers called dolmens, massive structures that still dot the landscape of Ireland, Wales, and Scotland today. These weren't simply tombs, they were portals. The Celts believed that certain locations held special power, places where the earth's energy was particularly strong. These sites became gateways where souls could more easily transition between worlds. The Druids spoke of a place called the Land of the Young, Tir na Nog in the Old Irish tongue. This was not a paradise reserved for the virtuous, but the natural destination for all souls after death. Here, time moved differently. A day in Tir na Nog might equal a year in our world, or perhaps a century. In this mystical realm, there was no aging, no sickness, no sorrow. It was a place of eternal spring, where apple trees bore fruit year-round, and music filled the air with melodies more beautiful than any earthly song. But even in Tir na Nog, souls did not remain forever. The Celtic belief in reincarnation meant that eventually, spirits would choose to return to the physical world to continue their learning and growth. They might return as human beings, or perhaps as animals, trees, or even forces of nature. This created a profound sense of connection between all living things. The Celtic warrior might believe that the eagle soaring overhead was his grandfather, watching over him. The wise woman gathering herbs might sense that the ancient oak she harvested from housed the spirit of a long-departed druid. This cyclical view of existence colored every aspect of Celtic life. They lived with an awareness of their place in the great web of being, understanding that their actions would echo through multiple lifetimes. A kindness shown to a stranger might return to benefit them in a future incarnation. A wrong committed against nature might require balancing in the next life. The Celts also believed in what they called the soul's progression through the elements. In their first life, a soul might be tied closely to the earth, learning the lessons of physical existence, survival, and material creation. In subsequent lives, the soul might progress to embody the qualities of water, learning about emotion, intuition, and the flow of life. Later incarnations might connect with air, developing intellect and communication, and finally fire, achieving spiritual mastery and divine connection. Celtic funeral rites reflected these deep beliefs about the continuity of existence. When a Celtic chieftain died, his funeral pyre was not just a means of disposing of the body, it was a sacred transformation. As the flames consumed the physical form, they were believed to release the spirit for its journey to the other world. The smoke that rose from the fire carried messages from the living to those who had gone before, while the ashes that remained were sometimes mixed into the soil of sacred groves, ensuring that the departed remained part of the living landscape. The Druids taught that memory was one of the most sacred gifts, for through remembrance, the departed continued to live among us. They maintained oral traditions that could preserve the words and deeds of ancestors for hundreds of years. In the flickering light of the sacred fire, Master Druids would recite the genealogies, not just of bloodlines, but of spiritual lineages, tracing the journey of souls through multiple incarnations. Celtic art reflected this eternal perspective on life and death. The intricate knots and spirals that adorned their metalwork and stone carvings were not mere decoration. They were visual representations of the soul's eternal journey. The Celtic knot, with its endless loops and intersections, showed how all existence was connected, how death and life flowed into each other without beginning or end. Women held special roles in Celtic death rituals, often serving as keen guides who helped souls navigate the transition between worlds. These were not professional mourners, but spiritual midwives who assisted in the birth process from one realm to another. Their haunting lamentations were not expressions of hopeless grief, but songs of guidance, helping the departed soul find its way to the other world, while comforting those left behind with reminders of eventual reunion. The Celtic calendar itself reflected their understanding of death as part of life's natural cycle. The year was divided not into 4 seasons, but into 2 great halves, the light half beginning at Beltane in early May, and the dark half starting at Samhain in November. The dark half was not seen as a time of death and sorrow, but as a necessary period of rest and reflection, when the earth renewed itself and spirits could move more freely between worlds. As you rest now in the comfort of your own bed, consider the profound peace that came from the Celtic understanding of existence. They lived without the desperate clinging to life that characterizes so much of human experience, because they knew that life itself was eternal. They faced each day with courage and each night with serenity, secure in the knowledge that they were part of something far greater and more enduring than any single lifetime could contain. The ancient Celts understood that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings having a human experience. This wisdom allowed them to live fully in each moment, while never losing sight of the eternal journey of the soul. In their world, every sunrise was a reminder of rebirth, every sunset a gentle transition, and every star in the night sky a beacon guiding souls on their endless voyage through the cycles of existence. In the quiet darkness of night, when modern worries fade and the ancient wisdom of the Celts whispers through the centuries, we can still touch that profound understanding. Death is not the end, but a doorway. Life is not a single story, but a chapter in an endless book. And we, like our Celtic ancestors, are eternal travelers on a journey that has no end, only beautiful, endless transformation. In the gentle darkness of night, as we journey deeper into the heart of Celtic wisdom, we come upon perhaps the most beautiful expression of their spiritual understanding. The Celts were artists of the soul, creators who transformed metal, stone, and skin into living prayers that spoke across centuries. Their art was never mere decoration. It was sacred language, written in spirals and knots that told the story of existence itself. Picture yourself walking through the morning mist in an ancient Celtic settlement. The first light of dawn catches something glinting at the throat of a passing woman. As she moves closer, you see it clearly, a magnificent bronze torque, twisted with intricate patterns that seem to move and flow like water frozen in time. Each curve and spiral tells a story. Each intersection of lines holds meaning deeper than words could ever express. The Celts understood something that we are only now beginning to rediscover. They knew that symbols and patterns could carry power, that certain shapes and designs could connect the human spirit to the divine forces of the universe. Their art was not created to impress others or display wealth, though it certainly did. Both. It was created as a form of communion, a way to align oneself with the eternal rhythms that governed all existence. At the heart of Celtic artistic expression lay the sacred spiral. This simple yet profound shape appeared everywhere in Celtic culture, from the great stone monuments of Newgrange in Ireland to the smallest bronze brooches worn by common folk. The spiral represented the journey of the soul, the path from the material world to the spiritual realm and back again. It showed how life moved not in straight lines, but in great sweeping curves that always returned to their beginning, yet at a higher level of understanding. When a Celtic artist carved a spiral into stone or hammered it into gold, they were not simply making a pretty design. They were creating a map of spiritual transformation, a guide that would help the soul navigate its eternal journey. The spiral began at the outer edge, representing birth and the soul's entry into the physical world. As it curved inward, it symbolized the journey through life, with all its trials and lessons. At the center lay the moment of death and spiritual awakening, the point where the soul touched the divine. But the spiral did not end there, for most Celtic spirals were double spirals, showing how the journey continued outward again, representing rebirth and the soul's return to new life with greater wisdom. The triple spiral, or triskel, held even deeper meaning for the Celtic people. This ancient symbol showed three spirals radiating from a central point, like three arms of the same cosmic dance. To the Celts, 3 was the most sacred number, representing the fundamental forces that shaped all existence. The triskel could symbolize the 3 realms of land, sea, and sky. It could represent the 3 aspects of the goddess, maiden, mother, and crone. Or it might show the 3 stages of existence, past, present, and future, all connected in an eternal flow. Craftsmen worked with a reverence that bordered on worship. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the village still slept, the metalsmith would light his forge with prayers upon his lips. The fire that melted bronze and gold was not merely a tool. It was a sacred flame that transformed raw earth into objects of power and beauty. As he worked, shaping the hot metal with practiced hands, he was participating in the same creative force that shaped mountains and moved stars across the sky. The Celtic knot, perhaps the most recognizable of all Celtic symbols, emerged from this sacred understanding of interconnectedness. These intricate patterns, with their endless loops and interwoven lines, showed how all existence was connected. There was no beginning to a Celtic knot, no end, just as there was no beginning. To the soul's journey, no final destination. Each line flowed into the next, creating patterns of such complexity and beauty that they seemed to pulse with life. Celtic warriors wore these symbols not as mere ornaments, but as spiritual armor. A bronze shield boss decorated with spirals, and knots was believed to carry protective power. A sword hilt wrapped with sacred patterns connected the warrior to the strength of his ancestors. A torque around the neck was more than jewelry. It was a badge of honor and a talisman of protection, marking the wearer as someone who walked in harmony with the sacred forces of the universe. The process of creating Celtic art was itself a form of meditation and prayer. Consider the painstaking work required to create a single illuminated manuscript page, like those found in the famous Book of Kells. Monks, working by candlelight in their stone cells, would spend months creating a single page of spirals, knots, and interlaced patterns. Each stroke of the pen was made with conscious intention, each color mixed with sacred purpose. The resulting artwork was not just beautiful to look at, it was imbued with the spiritual energy of its creator. Celtic tattoos and body painting told the story of the person's spiritual journey. Warriors might have their skin marked with the symbols of their clan and their personal totems. These were not random decorations, but carefully chosen designs that connected the wearer to specific spiritual powers. A spiral tattooed over the heart might help the soul find its way in the eye. Afterlife. Not work on the arms could channel the strength of ancestors. Symbols painted on the face before battle were prayers made visible, invoking protection and courage. Women in Celtic society often wore elaborate brooches and pins that served both practical and spiritual purposes. These beautiful objects held their cloaks in place, but they also carried deep symbolic meaning. A brooch shaped like a tree might connect the wearer to the wisdom of the forest. One decorated with water symbols could invoke the flowing power of rivers and streams. The wealthy might wear dozens of such ornaments, creating a complex tapestry of spiritual protection and connection. The great stone circles that still dot the Celtic lands were perhaps the most magnificent expression of Celtic artistic vision. These massive monuments, like Stonehenge and the countless smaller circles throughout Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, were both functional calendars and spiritual artworks. The placement of each stone was carefully calculated to align with celestial events, but the overall effect was one of breathtaking beauty. Standing within one of these circles at sunrise or sunset, surrounded by stones that had weathered thousands of years, one could feel the presence of the ancient artists who created these masterpieces. Celtic metalwork reached heights of sophistication that would not be matched for centuries after their decline. The famous Ardagh chalice, discovered in Ireland, shows the incredible skill of Celtic craftsmen. Every surface of this silver vessel is covered with intricate patterns, spirals within. Spirals, knots that seem to dance in the changing light. But this was not art for art's sake. The chalice was created for sacred rituals, and every pattern upon its surface had meaning. The spirals guided the eye and the spirit inward, preparing the soul for communion with the divine. The Celts also created beautiful jewelry that served as both adornment and spiritual protection. Rings were carved with symbols that told the story of the wearer's clan and spiritual affiliations. Necklaces incorporated sacred stones and metals, each chosen for its particular power. Amber, with its warm golden glow and ancient origins, was prized for its connection to solar energy and the life force. Silver, the metal of the moon, was used to enhance intuition and spiritual sight. Gold, rare and precious, was reserved for the most sacred objects and the highest-ranking members of society. The creation of Celtic art was often a communal activity. In the long winter evenings, when darkness fell early and the wind howled around the stone walls of their homes, Celtic families would gather around the fire to work on their crafts. Mothers would teach daughters the intricate patterns of embroidery, passing down not just techniques, but the spiritual meanings of each design. Fathers would show sons how to carve wood and work metal, explaining how each tool was an extension of the craftsman's spirit. Celtic illuminated manuscripts, created in the monasteries after Christianity arrived, show how Celtic artistic traditions adapted and evolved. The famous Book of Kells combines Christian imagery with traditional Celtic patterns, creating pages of such beauty that they seem to glow with inner light. The scribes who created these masterpieces understood that they were not just copying text, they were creating sacred objects that would carry spiritual power for generations. Even in their everyday objects, the Celts infused artistic beauty and spiritual meaning. A simple clay pot might be decorated with spirals that ensured the food cooked within would nourish both body and soul. A wooden comb could be carved with knotwork that would bring beauty and strength to the hair it touched. Nothing was too humble to be blessed with sacred patterns, for the Celts understood that the divine lived in every aspect of existence. The colors used in Celtic art were chosen with great care and spiritual purpose. Red, the color of blood and life force, was used to invoke strength and passion. Blue, the color of sky and deep water, brought peace and spiritual connection. Green, the color of growing things, represented renewal and the eternal cycle of life. Gold was the color of the sun and divine illumination. Black was not the color of death, but of the fertile darkness from which all life emerged. As you rest now in the peaceful darkness, imagine yourself as an ancient Celtic artist, your hands moving with practiced skill as you create patterns of endless beauty. Feel the rhythm of the spiral as it flows from your fingers, connecting you to the great dance of existence. See how each knot you tie binds you closer to the eternal web that connects all living things. Understand that you, like those ancient craftsmen, are participating in the ongoing creation of the universe, adding your own thread to the great tapestry of being. The art of the Celts speaks to us still, across the centuries, reminding us that beauty and spirituality are not separate things, but different aspects of the same eternal truth. In every spiral, we see the journey of the soul. In every knot, we understand the interconnectedness of all existence. In every piece of Celtic art, that has survived the passage of time. We hear the whisper of ancient wisdom, calling us back to a way of seeing that recognizes the sacred in every curve and line, the divine in every pattern that flows like a prayer made visible in metal, stone, and thread. In the misty dawn of the Celtic world, where courage and beauty danced together like lovers, there existed a truth that would seem impossible to our modern minds. The fiercest warriors were also the most passionate musicians. The same hands that could wield a sword with deadly precision could coax the most haunting melodies from a harp. The same voices that roared battle cries across smoky battlefields could weave songs of such beauty that they moved listeners to tears. Picture, if you will, a Celtic warrior preparing for battle. But banish from your mind the crude barbarian of Hollywood imagination. Instead, see a figure of remarkable complexity and refinement. His hair is carefully braided with bronze ornaments that catch the morning light. His cloak is fastened with a brooch of intricate metalwork that tells the story of his lineage. Around his neck hangs a torque of twisted gold, not merely ornamental, but a sacred symbol of his spiritual and social standing. But most surprising of all, strapped to his back alongside his shield and spear is a small harp. For this warrior understands something that has been lost in our modern world, that music and warfare are not opposites, but two expressions of the same divine fire that burns within the human spirit. The Celts believed that music held power beyond mere entertainment. It could heal the wounded, inspire the fearful, and even influence the gods themselves. A song sung with proper intention could change the weather, bring victory in battle, or guide souls safely to the other world. This was not superstition, but deep wisdom born from thousands of years of living in harmony with the unseen forces that shape existence. Celtic warriors carried small harps called clairseach, instruments of remarkable beauty and complexity. These were not crude noisemakers, but sophisticated musical instruments capable of producing sounds of ethereal beauty. The strings, made from bronze or the finest gut, were tuned to scales that seemed to capture the very essence of wind through trees and water over stone. When plucked by skilled fingers, these harps could produce melodies that seemed to come from another world entirely. Before any major battle, Celtic armies would gather in great circles while their bards and warriors performed the ancient songs. These were not simple marching tunes, but complex musical narratives that told the stories of heroes past, invoked the protection of ancestors, and wove spells of courage and strength around the assembled fighters. The music would begin softly, like whispers carried on the wind, then build gradually into a crescendo that set hearts pounding and spirits soaring. The carnix, a magnificent bronze war trumpet shaped like a serpent or boar, was perhaps the most distinctive musical weapon in the Celtic arsenal. Standing taller than a man, with its head raised high and mouth open as if breathing fire, the carnix was designed to strike terror into enemy hearts while inspiring Celtic warriors to greater feats of bravery. The sound it produced was unlike anything else in the ancient world, a haunting, otherworldly tone that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. When Roman armies first encountered Celtic warriors, they wrote with wonder and fear about the sounds that preceded battle. The Romans, with their disciplined military formations and standardized equipment, were unprepared for the psychological impact of Celtic war music. As the mist cleared from ancient battlefields, Roman soldiers would hear first a low humming, like the earth itself singing. Then would come the gradual addition of harps, their melodies weaving together in complex harmonies that seemed to make the very air tremble. Celtic battle songs were not random compositions, but carefully structured, pieces that served specific purposes. Some songs were designed to invoke the protection of particular gods or goddesses. Others called upon the spirits of ancestors to fight alongside the living. Still others were magical incantations meant to confuse and demoralize the enemy. The most powerful songs were said to thin the veil between worlds, allowing supernatural allies to join the battle. The connection between music and warfare in Celtic culture ran deeper than mere psychological tactics. The Celts understood that both music and battle were expressions of life force, of the creative and destructive powers that shaped the universe. A skilled warrior was one who could channel these forces through both sword and song, creating harmony. From chaos, beauty from violence, Celtic women played crucial roles in the musical aspects of warfare. The banshee or banshee, whose wailing warned of impending death, was only one manifestation of the feminine power that connected music to the mysteries of life and death. Celtic warrior queens like Boudica were known not only for their tactical brilliance, but for their ability to inspire troops through song and story. Their voices could carry across vast battlefields, weaving spells of courage that transformed ordinary farmers and craftsmen into heroes worthy of legend. The training of a Celtic warrior included musical education as a matter of course. Young men destined for the warrior class would spend years learning not only sword work and spearcraft, but also the intricate finger patterns required to play the harp and the breathing techniques necessary to produce pure tones from bronze. Horns. They memorized hundreds of songs, each with its own purpose and power. A warrior who could not contribute to the pre-battle music was considered incomplete, no matter how skilled with weapons. Celtic battle formations themselves were designed with musical considerations in mind. Warriors were arranged not just for tactical advantage, but to create the best acoustic effects. The Carnix players would be positioned to maximize the impact of their otherworldly sound, while harpists were placed where their melodies could weave together most effectively. The entire army became a massive orchestra, with each warrior both musician and fighter, each weapon both tool of war and instrument of song. The rhythm of Celtic warfare reflected this musical understanding. Battles did not begin with chaotic rushes, but with carefully orchestrated build-ups that mirrored the structure of their songs. The initial skirmishes were like the quiet opening notes of a great composition. As more warriors joined the fray, the tempo and intensity would increase, building toward climactic moments that could decide the fate of kingdoms. Even individual combat was seen through musical eyes. The clash of sword on shield was not mere noise, but percussion that added to the great symphony of battle. Skilled warriors learned to fight with rhythm, their movements flowing like dancers, following an unheard melody. The greatest Celtic heroes were said to fight with such grace and timing that their combat became a form of deadly poetry. Violence transformed into art. The songs that survived battle were just as important as the warriors who lived to sing them. Celtic bards would weave the events of each conflict into new compositions, ensuring that acts of heroism and sacrifice would never be forgotten. These battle songs became part of the cultural memory, passed down through generations and sung around fires on winter nights. Through music, the dead continued to fight alongside the living, their spirits invoked whenever their songs were sung. Celtic instruments were crafted with the same spiritual attention given to weapons and religious objects. A harp intended for battle use was blessed by Druids and decorated with symbols of protection and power. The wood was chosen from sacred groves, often oak trees that had stood for centuries and absorbed the wisdom of countless seasons. The bronze fittings were worked by master craftsmen who understood that they were creating not just musical instruments, but vessels for divine inspiration. The bodhran, the great circular drum that provided the heartbeat for Celtic music, held special significance in warfare. Its rhythm could synchronize the heartbeats of an entire army, creating a sense of unity and shared purpose that made individual warriors feel part of something greater than themselves. The sound of multiple bodhran playing together created a thunderous pulse that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, announcing to gods and mortals alike that the Celtic warriors were coming, Celtic war chants were passed down through families like precious heirlooms. Each clan had its own battle songs, compositions that told the stories of ancestral heroes and invoked their protection for current generations. These songs were considered so powerful that they were never sung except in times of war or great ceremony. To sing another clan's battle song without permission was considered an act of spiritual theft, punishable by exile or death. The aftermath of battle was also marked by music, but of a different kind. Celtic warriors would gather to sing laments for the fallen, haunting melodies that helped guide the souls of the dead to the other world. These funeral songs were not expressions of defeat or despair, but celebrations of lives well lived and deaths that brought honor. The same harps that had inspired courage before battle now offered comfort to the grieving and safe passage to the departed. Celtic music in warfare was also deeply connected to the natural world. Many battle songs incorporated the sounds of wind, water, and animal calls, creating compositions that seemed to channel the very forces of nature. Warriors believed that by aligning their music with these primal rhythms, they could draw upon the power of the earth itself. A battle song that perfectly captured the sound of storm winds was thought to be able to summon actual storms to confuse the enemy. The training grounds where Celtic warriors practiced were also places of musical education. Young fighters would learn to coordinate their movements with complex rhythms, developing the timing and grace that would serve them in both combat and ceremony. Sword work was taught as a form of dance, with each strike and parry flowing in harmony with underlying musical patterns. This approach created warriors who moved with fluid beauty, even in the heat of battle. As Christianity began to influence Celtic lands, the tradition of warrior musicians evolved, but never disappeared entirely. Celtic monks, many of whom came from warrior families, brought musical sophistication to their new faith. The same skills that once created battle songs now produced some of the most beautiful religious music in medieval Europe. The great monasteries of Ireland and Scotland became centers of musical learning, preserving Celtic musical traditions, even as the warrior culture that created them faded into history, in the gentle quiet of night. As we remember these warrior poets of ancient times, we can still hear echoes of their music in the wind through the trees. The Celtic understanding that beauty and strength, art and warfare, music and courage are not opposites, but partners in the great dance of existence offers us a vision of human wholeness that our fragmented modern world desperately needs. Celtic warrior, with harp on his back and song in his heart, reminds us that we too can be both strong and gentle, fierce and beautiful, ready for battle, yet devoted to the creation of beauty. In their example, we see that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the power to create harmony from chaos, to find music even in the midst of conflict, and to remember that every ending is also a beginning of a new and more beautiful song. In the amber light of history, where shadows of empires stretch across centuries, there unfolded one of the most profound cultural collisions the world has ever witnessed. It was not merely a clash of armies or the conquest of territory, but a meeting of two completely different ways of seeing existence itself. On one side stood Rome, with its roads straight as spear shafts and its laws carved in marble. On the other stood the Celts, with their sacred groves and their wisdom written only in memory and starlight. Picture the morning when these two worlds first truly met on the field of battle. The Roman legions advance in perfect formation, their bronze armor gleaming in the sun, their shields locked together like the scales of some great serpent. They move with mechanical precision, each step measured, each javelin held at exactly the same angle. Above them fly the golden eagles of their legions, symbols of imperial power and divine favor. But listen, carried on the morning wind comes another sound entirely. From the mists that still cling to the rolling hills, there emerges a haunting melody, wild and free as the flight of hawks. The Carnick's horns sing their otherworldly song, while Celtic harps weave harmonies that seem to make the very air shimmer with magic. And through this music comes a sight that stops even veteran Roman soldiers in their tracks. The Celtic warriors emerge from the forest like figures from a dream. Their hair streams behind them, adorned with bronze ornaments that catch the light, like fallen stars. Their bodies are painted with spirals and knots in blue woad, turning each fighter into a living work of art. Their weapons gleam with precious metals. But more striking than any sword or spear is the wild beauty in their eyes, the look of people who have touched the infinite and found it good. Julius Caesar, greatest of Roman generals, would later write of his encounters with the Celtic peoples of Gaul, but even his eloquent prose could barely capture the strangeness of what he witnessed. Here were people who seemed to live in a completely different universe, where trees had souls and rivers were goddesses, where death was merely a doorway, and where the council of Druids carried more weight than the commands of kings. The Romans prided themselves on their rationality, their systematic approach to conquest and governance. They built their empire with engineering and law, creating uniform systems that could be applied from Britain to Egypt. Every Roman city followed the same basic plan. Every Roman road was built to the same exacting standards. Every Roman law was designed to create order from chaos, to impose the will of civilization upon the wild randomness of nature. But the Celts represented something that Roman logic could not easily categorize or control. They were not barbarians in the way Romans understood the term. Their metalwork was superior to anything Rome could produce. Their understanding of astronomy rivaled that of Greek philosophers. Their poetry and music achieved heights of beauty that even cultured Romans admired. Yet they refused to write down their most sacred knowledge, trusting instead to human memory and the wisdom of the oral tradition. This fundamental difference in how knowledge was preserved and transmitted struck at the very heart of the conflict between these two civilizations. Romans created libraries filled with scrolls and tablets, believing that written law and recorded history were the foundations of civilized society. The Celts, guided by their Druids, maintained that the most important truths could never be committed to writing. That wisdom lived only in the human heart and could be passed down only through the sacred relationship between teacher and student. The Druids particularly fascinated and frustrated Roman commanders. These were clearly educated, sophisticated people who could debate philosophy with the finest Roman minds. Yet they insisted on conducting their most important ceremonies in forest groves, claimed to receive guidance from the spirits of trees, and taught doctrines that seemed to turn Roman values upside down. Where Romans sought to impose order through force and law, Druids spoke of finding harmony through understanding natural cycles and spiritual principles. Caesar's encounters with Vercingetorix, the great Gallic chieftain who united the Celtic tribes against Rome, illustrate perfectly the cultural chasm between these two peoples. Vercingetorix was not merely a military leader, but a spiritual figure who embodied the Celtic understanding that leadership came not from political appointment or military rank, but from the ability to channel divine wisdom for the benefit of the people. The siege of Alesia, where Caesar finally defeated Vercingetorix, was more than a military victory. It was the triumph of one worldview over another. The Romans, with their superior organization and technology, proved that systematic planning could overcome individual heroism, that engineering could defeat inspiration. But even in victory, Caesar showed unusual respect for his defeated opponent, recognizing in Vercingetorix a nobility that transcended mere military skill. The Roman conquest of Celtic lands proceeded methodically, but it was never simply a matter of replacing one government with another. Rome faced the challenge of absorbing a people whose entire way of life was based on principles that seemed to contradict everything Roman civilization stood for. The Celts valued individual excellence. over collective conformity. They trusted intuition more than written law. They saw the natural world as sacred rather than something to be dominated and exploited. Roman administrators quickly learned that governing Celtic territories required different strategies than those used elsewhere in the empire. Celtic warriors might accept defeat in battle, but they could not be made to abandon their fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality. Even when forced to worship Roman gods, they found ways to maintain their connection to the ancient deities of forest and stream. Even when compelled to follow Roman law, they continued to seek the counsel of Druids in matters of real importance. The Romans' systematic campaign against the Druid class reveals how deeply they understood the spiritual heart of Celtic resistance. These were not military targets in any conventional sense, but the living repositories of Celtic wisdom and culture. By eliminating the Druids, Rome hoped to cut the roots that connected Celtic people to their ancestral ways of knowing and being. Island of Mona, known today as Anglesey, became the final stronghold of Druidical power in Britain. Here, surrounded by sacred groves and ancient stone circles, the last free Druids continued to practice their ancient arts and teach their timeless wisdom. When Roman forces finally crossed the strait to attack this island sanctuary, they encountered something that shook even hardened veterans. The Druids met the Roman assault not with weapons, but with curses and incantations that seemed to freeze the legions in their tracks. Women in black robes ran between the warriors, wailing prophecies of doom and calling upon the gods of earth and sky to defend their sacred ground. For a moment, the rational Roman mind faltered before the primal power of Celtic spirituality. But only for a moment. Discipline reasserted itself, and the sacred groves burned as Roman efficiency triumphed over Celtic magic. Yet even as the Druids died and their sacred sites were destroyed, something of their wisdom survived. Celtic culture proved remarkably resilient, adapting to Roman rule while maintaining its essential character. Celtic craftsmen continued to create objects of surpassing beauty, though now they often incorporated Roman motifs alongside traditional Celtic patterns. Celtic bards continued to sing the old songs, though they might now tell stories of Celtic heroes serving in Roman legions. The relationship between conqueror and conquered gradually evolved into something more complex than simple domination. Romans living in Celtic territories found themselves influenced by the very culture they had come to suppress. They began to appreciate the subtle beauty of Celtic art, the haunting power of Celtic music, the profound wisdom of Celtic philosophy. Some Romans even sought out Celtic teachers, drawn by spiritual insights that seemed to offer what their own culture lacked. Celtic warriors who joined Roman legions brought their own unique gifts to imperial service. Their individual courage and initiative, so different from Roman collective discipline, proved valuable in many military situations. Their understanding of local terrain and weather patterns made them excellent scouts and guides. Their musical skills enlivened the evening hours in distant garrison towns, bringing beauty and wonder to the harsh realities of military life. The Romanization of Celtic lands was never complete, nor was it entirely one-sided. Just as Celtic culture absorbed Roman influences, so too did Roman culture in these regions take on distinctively Celtic characteristics. Roman villas in Celtic territories often incorporated designs and decorative elements that would have been foreign to buildings. In Italy, Roman temples dedicated to Celtic deities appeared throughout the conquered lands, showing how the spiritual hunger of ordinary people transcended political boundaries. The Celtic goddess Brigid, associated with smithcraft, poetry, and healing, found new life as the Roman goddess Minerva Balisama. Celtic sacred springs were rededicated to Roman water deities, but the pilgrims who visited them continued to make offerings in the old Celtic manner. As sacred groves might be cut down, but the memory of their holiness lingered in the hearts of the people. Perhaps most significantly, The Celtic understanding of individual spiritual worth began to influence Ramang thought in ways that would eventually contribute to the rise of Christianity in the Western world. The Celtic belief that every soul was precious and that wisdom could come from the humblest person began to challenge Roman assumptions about social hierarchy and the nature of authority. Celtic women, who had enjoyed far greater freedom and influence than their Roman counterparts, continued to play important roles even under Ramang rule. They became priestesses in Romano-Celtic temples, traders who maintained economic networks across tribal boundaries, and teachers who preserved Celtic knowledge through dark times. Their influence helped to moderate some of the harsher aspects of Roman patriarchal society. The great irony of the Roman conquest of Celtic lands is that it ultimately preserved much Celtic culture that might otherwise have been lost to time. Roman writers, even as they celebrated their military victories, recorded detailed descriptions of Celtic customs, beliefs, and practices. Roman artists created works that incorporated Celtic designs and themes. Roman administrators, seeking to govern effectively, learned Celtic languages and customs. As the centuries passed and the Ramang Empire itself began to decline, Celtic culture experienced a remarkable renaissance in the very lands where it had been suppressed. The collapse of Roman administrative systems allowed ancient patterns of tribal organization and spiritual practice to reassert themselves. The great Celtic monasteries that arose during the early Christian period combined Roman organizational skills with Celtic devotion to learning and artistic beauty. In the quiet darkness of this night, as we remember that distant clash of civilizations, we can see how the meeting of Celtic and Roman worlds created something new and beautiful. Neither culture was destroyed by contact with the other. Instead, both were transformed, creating a rich synthesis that combined Roman practicality with Celtic spirituality, Roman organization with Celtic creativity, Ramang law with Celtic wisdom. The legacy of this great encounter lives on in the very landscape of Western Europe, where Roman roads still carry traffic between towns built on Celtic foundations, where Roman stones were used to build churches dedicated to Celtic saints, where the marriage of two great cultures continues to bear fruit in art, literature, and spiritual understanding that enriches our world even today. The great wheel of time continued its ancient turn, and with it came changes that would ripple across the Celtic world like stones dropped into still water. The old ways, which had flourished for centuries beneath the canopy of sacred oaks, now faced forces that would reshape the very fabric of Celtic existence. As Roman legions marched deeper into Celtic lands, they brought more than just swords and shields. They carried with them a different vision of the world, one built on stone roads rather than forest paths, on written law rather than spoken wisdom, on uniform order rather than the wild, untamed spirit that had defined Celtic life for generations. Druids, those keepers of ancient knowledge, found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Roman generals understood that to truly conquer the Celts, they must first break the spiritual backbone that held their society together. The Druids were not merely priests or healers. They were the living memory of their people, the threads that wove together law, tradition, and sacred understanding. In the year 60 CE, the Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus launched a devastating assault on the sacred island of Mona, known today as Anglesey. This island was the heart of Druidic learning, a place where young initiates came to spend 20 years learning the vast oral traditions of their ancestors. The Romans knew that by striking here, they would wound the Celtic spirit in ways that no battlefield victory could achieve. The attack came at dawn, when mist still clung to the island shores like the breath of sleeping spirits. Roman soldiers crossed the Menai Strait on flat-bottomed boats, their armor gleaming coldly in the pale morning light. What they found waiting for them was a sight that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Along the shoreline stood Druids in their white robes. their arms raised to the sky, calling upon the ancient powers that dwelt in stone and tree and flowing water. Beside them stood Celtic women, their hair wild and free, brandishing torches like fallen stars. The air itself seemed to thicken with the weight of centuries-old curses and blessings, spoken in the old tongue. But iron and discipline proved stronger than ritual and tradition on that terrible morning. The Romans landed, their formations tight and unyielding as granite. They cut down the Druids where they stood. Their sacred groves became pyres, and scrolls of parchment rare in a culture that treasured spoken word were fed to hungry flames. Even as smoke rose from Mona's sacred groves, the Celtic spirit proved harder to extinguish than the Romans had imagined. Like water finding new channels when a dam is built, Celtic culture began to flow in different directions, seeking spaces where it might continue to flourish. In the remote valleys of Wales, where mountain mists provided natural sanctuary, Celtic bards continued to sing the old songs around fires that flickered in hidden glens. They adapted, weaving their ancient tales into new forms that could survive in a changing world. The stories of great heroes like C. Tulane and the Tame began to be whispered rather than proclaimed, passed from grandmother to grandchild in the quiet hours before dawn. In Ireland, protected by the sea's embrace, Celtic Christianity began to emerge, a unique flowering that blended the old ways with new beliefs. Irish monasteries became repositories of both Christian learning and Celtic wisdom, their illuminated manuscripts decorated with the same spiraling patterns that had once adorned warrior shields and Druid staves. The Celtic Druids, those masters of memory who had never committed their deepest knowledge to writing, now found themselves scattered like leaves before an autumn wind. Some fled to the furthest reaches of Scotland, where the Highland mists provided cover for their continued practices. Others melted into the population, becoming village healers, storytellers, and keepers of local customs. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was how Celtic wisdom began to hide in plain sight. The old festivals found new names and new meanings. Samhain, that sacred time when the veil between worlds grew thin, gradually transformed into All Hallows' Eve. Lugnasad became Lammas, celebrating the harvest with rituals that echoed ancient Thanksgiving ceremonies to the gods of grain and growth. The sacred wells, those portals to the otherworld that had been venerated since time immemorial, were quietly rededicated to Christian saints. But the pilgrims who came to these waters still whispered the old prayers, still tied ribbons to sacred trees, still felt the presence of something far older than any human institution. Celtic metalwork, those intricate patterns of interlacing, spirals and knotwork, found new expression in Christian crosses and book illumination. The same hands that had once crafted torques for Celtic nobles now created chalices and reliquaries. But the patterns they inscribed carried the memory of older meanings, the endless cycle of life, death, and rebirth that lay at the heart of Celtic. Understanding in the great forests that still covered much of northern Europe, small communities of Celts continued to live as their ancestors had, largely unnoticed by Roman administrators focused on tax collection and road building. These forest dwellers maintained the old relationships with the natural world, reading signs in the flight of birds, marking time by the phases of the moon, and gathering herbs according to rhythms their great-grandmothers had taught them. Language itself became a form of resistance and preservation. While Latin spread through the Roman territories like a rising tide, Celtic languages retreated to the margins, but there they deepened and enriched themselves. Welsh, Irish, and Scottish Gaelic became vessels for carrying ancient wisdom into a new age, their very sounds resonating with memories of when the world was younger and magic walked more openly among mortals. As generations passed, the trauma of conquest began to heal in the way that all wounds eventually heal by growing over with new tissue that carries within it the memory of what came before. Celtic children grew up speaking Latin or the emerging vernacular languages, but their mothers sang them to sleep with lullabies that contained fragments of older songs, melodies that had once been used to invoke the protection of household gods and guardian spirits. The dissolution was not complete destruction, it was transformation, like water changing from liquid to vapor, yet remaining essentially itself. Celtic culture learned to survive by becoming more fluid, more adaptable, more willing to wear the protective coloring of whatever dominant culture surrounded it. In the growing darkness of this historical twilight, Druids who had once stood openly in sacred groves now gathered in hidden places, abandoned quarries where the old gods still dwelt in limestone and granite, remote islands where seabirds were the only witnesses to ancient rites, deep caves where the earth itself seemed to remember the first words spoken in the Celtic tongue. These hidden Druids developed new ways of preserving their knowledge. Unable to rely on the great teaching centers like Mona, they created smaller, more secretive networks. A blacksmith in Gaul might carry forward the metallurgical mysteries, while a midwife in Britain preserved the healing arts. A storyteller in Ireland maintained the genealogies of heroes, while a farmer in Wales continued to plant and harvest according to the old lunar calendar. The retreat was not defeat, it was a strategic withdrawal into the places where the human heart touches something larger than itself. Celtic spirituality found refuge in the spaces between day and night, between seasons, between the visible world and the realm of dreams. It survived in the liminal moments that no empire, however powerful, could ever fully control or claim. And so, as the chapter of open Celtic civilization drew to a close, another chapter began to open, one written not in the grand gestures of kings and druids, but in the quiet persistence of ordinary people who carried within their hearts the memory of what it meant to live in harmony with the breathing world, to honor the ancestors, and to trust in the great wheel's eternal turning. The mists that had always been Celtic allies now became their sanctuary, wrapping the old wisdom in veils of secrecy that would preserve it through the long centuries ahead, waiting for times when the world would once again hunger for the wild wisdom that flows like sap through the sacred trees. In the quiet hours of dawn, when mist still clings to the valleys of Ireland and the highlands of Scotland, something ancient stirs. It moves through the streets of modern cities, flows beneath the rush of contemporary life, and whispers in languages that bridge the gap between what was and what is. The Celtic spirit, far from vanishing into history's shadows, has woven itself so deeply into the fabric of our modern world that we often fail to recognize its presence. Listen closely on an October evening in any American neighborhood, and you will hear it. Children's laughter echoes through streets lined with jack-o'-lanterns, their carved faces flickering with candlelight that would have been familiar to ancient Druids. The night is Halloween, but its roots reach back through centuries to Samhain, that sacred Celtic festival when the veil between worlds grew thin as gossamer. The costumes may have changed from the animal skins and masks worn by Celtic celebrants to superheroes and fictional characters, but the essential magic remains unchanged. On this night, just as their ancestors did 2,000 years ago, people across the world acknowledge that there are realms beyond the ordinary, that spirits walk among us, and that some boundaries are meant to be crossed. In the concert halls of major cities, something equally ancient unfolds each evening. The haunting melody of a Celtic harp rises like mist from the stage, its notes carrying within them the memory of Irish courts and Scottish glens. The audience, perhaps unaware of the tradition they're witnessing, finds themselves transported by sounds that their ancestors heard when the world was younger, and the younger connection between music and magic was understood by all. These modern Celtic musicians, artists, like Clannad, Enya, and the chieftains, have become cultural ambassadors, carrying the old melodies into new centuries. Their music speaks to something deep within the human soul, that part of us that remembers when every forest had its guardian spirit, when every stream carried messages from the other world, and when the earth itself was recognized as a living, breathing entity deserving of reverence and respect. The intricate knotwork that once decorated Celtic manuscripts and warrior shields now adorns wedding rings worn by couples who may never have set foot in Ireland or Scotland. These Celtic knots, with their endless loops and interconnected patterns, speak to a universal human longing for connection, the understanding that all life is woven together in patterns too complex for any single mind to fully comprehend. In tattoo parlors from Los Angeles to New York, artists carefully ink Celtic spirals and triskelions onto willing skin, creating modern versions of the body art that once marked Celtic warriors and Druids. These contemporary seekers may not fully understand the ancient meanings they carry, but they sense the power in these symbols, the triple spiral representing the three realms of land, sea, and sky, or the endless knot symbolizing the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The revival of Celtic spirituality in modern times speaks to a hunger that industrial civilization has never quite managed to satisfy. In bookshops across America, shelves overflow with guides to Celtic wisdom, modern interpretations of Druidic practices, and attempts to reconnect with the earth-based spirituality that once flourished in the great forests of Europe. Modern Wiccan and neo-pagan movements have drawn heavily from Celtic traditions, adapting ancient seasonal celebrations to contemporary needs. The 8 festivals of the Celtic year, from Samhain's honoring of ancestors to Beltane's celebration of life's return, now mark the passage of time for thousands of modern practitioners who gather in parks and private homes to light candles and speak words of gratitude that echo across the centuries. In the realm of literature, Celtic mythology has found new life in fantasy novels that captivate readers around the world. The stories of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the mythical race of gods who are said to have ruled Ireland before the coming of mortals, inspire contemporary writers to create worlds where magic still flows freely and the old powers still hold sway. These modern tales, while set in imaginary realms, carry forward the essential Celtic understanding that there are more layers to reality than those visible to the casual observer. They remind us that the world is full of wonder for those who know how to see, that heroism often comes from unexpected sources, and that the greatest adventures begin when we step off the well-traveled paths and venture into the unknown. The Celtic influence on modern Christmas celebrations runs deeper than most people realize. The Christmas tree, that beloved symbol now found in homes across the world, evolved from much older traditions of bringing evergreen boughs indoors during the darkest time of year. Celtic peoples understood that these living branches carried within them the promise that life would return, that the wheel would turn again, and that spring would follow even the longest winter. The wassailing tradition, where people would sing to apple trees and offer them cider to ensure a good harvest, survives in modified form in Christmas caroling. The ancient Celtic practice of leaving food and drink for wandering spirits on winter nights evolved into leaving cookies and milk for Santa Claus, a transformation that maintains the essential spirit of hospitality and acknowledgement of otherworldly visitors. In Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, the Celtic languages that once faced extinction are experiencing remarkable revivals. Irish Gaelic, Welsh, and Scottish Gaelic are being taught in schools, spoken in television programs, and celebrated in festivals that draw visitors from around the world. These languages carry within their very structure ways of understanding reality that cannot be fully translated into English concepts of time that spiral rather than march in straight lines, relationships with the natural world that assume consciousness in streams and stones, and social obligations that extend not just to other humans, but to all living beings. The modern environmental movement owes much to Celtic wisdom, though this debt is rarely acknowledged. The Celtic understanding that humans are not separate from nature, but part of it, that the earth is a living entity deserving of respect rather than merely a resource to be exploited, resonates strongly with contemporary efforts to address climate change and ecological destruction. Celtic art continues to evolve and inspire, its influence visible in everything from architecture to jewelry design. The flowing, organic forms that characterize Celtic artistic expression offer an alternative to the angular, mechanical aesthetics that dominated much of the industrial age. In gardens designed according to Celtic principles, plants are allowed to grow in natural patterns that mirror the spirals and curves found in ancient stone carvings. The Celtic understanding of sacred space, that certain places hold special power and deserve special reverence, has found new expression in the preservation of ancient sites and the creation of modern pilgrimage routes. The Camino de Santiago, while Christian in its current form, follows paths that were sacred to Celtic peoples long before the arrival of Christianity. Modern pilgrims who walk these ancient routes often report experiences that their Celtic ancestors would have recognized, moments of clarity that come from rhythmic walking, encounters with strangers who seem to carry messages from beyond the ordinary world, and a sense of connection to something larger than individual concerns. In the field of healing, ancient Celtic herbal traditions have found new life in the growing interest in natural medicine and holistic health practices. The Druids' understanding that plants carry within them specific energies and healing properties is being validated by modern research into the therapeutic compounds found in traditional Celtic remedies. The Celtic concept of the Finn Places locations, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds becomes permeable, continues to draw seekers from around the globe. Whether at the stone circles of Stonehenge, the mist-shrouded islands off the Scottish coast, or the holy wells of Ireland, modern pilgrims report experiences that echo the mystical encounters described in ancient Celtic literature. Perhaps most importantly, the Celtic legacy in our modern world lies not in any specific practice or tradition, but in an attitude toward existence itself. The Celtic worldview that sees the sacred in the everyday, that recognizes the intelligence of the natural world, and that understands human life as part of a vast, interconnected web of relationships, offers wisdom that feels increasingly relevant as we face the challenges of the 21st century. In urban gardens where people grow their own food, in community groups that gather to celebrate the changing seasons, in the growing recognition that indigenous wisdom traditions have much to teach modern civilization, the Celtic spirit continues to flourish. It adapts to new circumstances while maintaining its essential character, the understanding that life is sacred, that all beings are connected, and that the greatest adventures begin when we learn to listen to the whispers of the wind in the owl. Trees, the wheel continues to turn, just as the ancient Druids taught it would, carrying forward into an uncertain future the timeless wisdom of a people who knew how to live in harmony with the breathing world. And so, dear traveler through time, we come to the end of our journey through the mist-wreathed lands of the Celts. But like all Celtic stories, this ending is not truly an ending at all. It is a return to the beginning, another turn of the great wheel that the Druids understood governs all existence. The night grows deeper around us now, and if you listen carefully, truly carefully, you can hear them still. The whispers in the forest have never fallen silent. They flow beneath the sound of distant traffic, weave through the hum of modern life, and rise like ancient incense through the spaces between our hurried thoughts. In this quiet hour before sleep claims you, close your eyes and let your mind drift back to those primeval forests where our story began. See again those towering oaks, their branches reaching toward stars that shine with the same light that guided Celtic travelers 2,000 years ago. Feel the soft moss beneath your feet. Breathe in the rich scent of earth and growing things, and know that you are walking in a place that exists beyond the boundaries of time. The Druids spoke of three worlds: the land beneath our feet, the sea that surrounds us, and the sky that arches over all. But they knew, as you are beginning to understand, that these are not separate realms, but aspects of a single living whole. The wisdom they sought was not hidden in distant places, but woven into the very fabric of existence, waiting to be recognized by those who learned to see with eyes cleared of illusion. In every forest that still stands, in every stream that flows, unimpeded toward the sea, in every ancient stone that holds the memory of human hands, the Celtic spirit endures. It speaks to those who remember how to listen, offering insights that no amount of technological progress can replace. The old Druids never wrote down their deepest teachings, not because they feared losing them, but because they understood that true wisdom cannot be captured in words alone. It must be lived, breathed, felt in the changing of the seasons and the rhythm of the tides. It must be passed from heart to heart, like flame touching flame, each generation adding its own light to the endless chain of understanding. Tonight, as you prepare to enter the realm of dreams, you carry within you the stories we have shared. They have become part of your inner landscape, seeds of ancient wisdom planted in the fertile soil of your imagination. Like the acorns that fall from sacred oaks, these stories will grow in their own time, their roots reaching deep into the hidden springs of memory, their branches spreading to shelter new understanding. The Celtic year turns in endless cycles, light following darkness, death giving way to rebirth, summer's abundance flowing into winter's contemplative quiet. In your own life, you too experience these seasons and the Celtic understanding of time can offer comfort during the difficult passages. When winter comes to your heart, remember that it is not permanent. The wheel turns, and spring always returns to those who know how to wait with patience and trust. In the growing silence of this peaceful night, feel yourself becoming part of that eternal story. You are connected to the Celtic farmers who watched the same constellations wheel overhead, to the Druids who felt the pulse of life flowing through every living thing, to the warriors who faced their fears with courage born of spiritual certainty, and to the bards who kept the old stories alive through centuries of change and challenge. The mist that so often appears in Celtic tales is not mere weather, it is the breath of the otherworld, the visible sign that the boundaries between realms are thinner than we usually imagine. Tonight, as sleep draws near, you may find yourself wrapped in such mist, that gentle veil that separates waking from dreaming, consciousness from the deeper mysteries that dwell in the caverns of the soul. Let the Celtic understanding of the three realms guide you into sleep. Feel your body settling into the earth realm, heavy and peaceful as the roots of ancient trees. Let your emotions flow like water in the sea realm, carrying away the tensions and worries of the day. And allow your spirit to rise into the sky realm, where thoughts become as free as birds and dreams take wing on winds that know no earthly boundaries. The Druids taught that every person carries within them the capacity for wisdom, for healing, for connection with the sacred forces that move through all existence. You do not need to live in an ancient forest or speak in forgotten tongues to access this inheritance. It flows in your blood, beats in your heart, and whispers in the quiet moments when you pause long enough to hear. In your dreams tonight, you may find yourself walking forest paths that your feet have never known, but that your soul remembers. You may hear harps playing melodies that predate all written music, see fires burning in stone circles that exist beyond the reach of archaeological maps, and meet figures in white robes who speak truths that need no translation. These are not mere fantasies, but glimpses of the living tradition that connects all generations of seekers. The veil between past and present, between waking and dreaming, between self and cosmos, grows thin in the hours before dawn, just as Celts always knew it would. The stone circles still stand, weathered by time but unbroken in their essential purpose. They remind us that some things endure not because they resist change, but because they embody truths too fundamental to be altered by the passage of centuries. Love endures. Beauty endures. The human need for connection with something greater than individual concerns endures. And the whispers of wisdom that first arose in Celtic forests continue to offer guidance to any who know how to listen. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you the Celtic blessing that sees no true separation between the dreamer and the dream, between the seeker and that which is sought, between the human heart and the heart of the world. May your rest be deep and restorative, like the winter sleep of trees gathering strength for spring's return. May your dreams be rich with the colors of Celtic art, the deep blues of twilight skies, the emerald green of sacred groves, the silver of moonlight on water, and the gold of autumn leaves falling like blessings on the earth. And when morning comes, as it always does, may you wake with some of that ancient peace still glowing in your heart. May you see the world through eyes that remember how to find the sacred in the ordinary, the magical in the mundane. May you walk through your days knowing that you are part of a story larger than yourself, connected to all who have walked this earth with reverence and wonder. The wheel turns, the seasons change. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. And somewhere in the depths of the last forests, in the hidden places where modernity has not yet penetrated, the old spirits keep their patient vigil, waiting for those who remember how to approach with respect and humility. The whispers in the forest remain, eternal and unchanging as the love that moves the sun and stars. They speak of your place in the great tapestry of existence, of the sacred nature of your deepest longings, of the endless dance between earth and sky, between what is seen and what is sensed, between the story that ends and the story that is always beginning. Listen now. Listen well. In the growing quiet, in the deepening peace, in the gentle embrace of sleep, approaching like morning mist on a Celtic lake, the ancient voices sing their timeless song of blessing and remembrance. You are part of that song now, a note in the eternal melody, a thread in the endless weaving of earth and time and dream. Sleep well, dear traveler. The Druids' fire still burns. The sacred grove still stands. The great wheel still turns. And in your dreams, the Celtic spirit lives on, whispering its ancient wisdom to the eternal child who dwells in every human heart, reminding you that you are never alone, never separate from the great community of being that includes all who have lived, all who live now, and all who are yet to be born into this beautiful, mysterious, sacred world. The mist embraces you now. Rest comes gently, and the whispers in the forest carry you home to the peace that was always yours, waiting. In the depths of silence, where all stories begin and all journeys find their true destination in the endless, loving heart of being itself.